There is something really big happening in the history of humanity right now. It's called ChatGPT, and a lot of people are very excited about it. It's bigger than Tesla and the electrification of our society that I've been talking about in this channel. Playing with ChatGPT from OpenAI has become all the rage at the moment, and there are a lot of ways you can use it and benefit from it. But this type of artificial intelligence may also bring the dawn of the new dark ages, because in a post-literate area, those who continue to read and to practice critical thinking skills will increasingly be unable to effectively communicate with those who don't. Valerie Hudson, a university distinguished professor at Texas A&M University, has published a very attention-grabbing perspective in the Desert News, which I want to share with you because I believe every human being should know about these things in the possible dawn of the new dark age. So playing with ChatGPT from OpenAI has become all the rage at the moment. This online correspondent powered by artificial intelligence will attempt to answer your questions with a paragraph's worth of knowledge, write lyrics, or pen stories from prompts you suggested, and more, with all responses derived from information processed by algorithms. ChatGPT writes on the level of sophistication of about a sixth grader, I'd say scrapping the vast amount of online knowledge to do so. Not surprisingly, people are worried about the bias of ChatGPT. Online source material can be very much in line with favored narratives, especially as social media companies have been revealed to actively bury certain viewpoints in favor of others, even burying particular unwelcome facts. There are already reports that ChatGPT will actually refuse to answer certain questions, such as ones about drag queen story hours. That response is certainly not powered by the algorithms, but rather by the human creators behind it. Certain questions, it seems, should never be asked or answered even by artificial intelligence. In other cases, the answers depends on the role of an AI does, so to speak. I decided to run my own little experiment, asking ChatGPT the same question, quote, "Can a human being change sex?" 30 times in a row. 30 times the answer was no. 7 times the bot said yes, and 20 times it said nothing about sex, but instead explained how a person might change gender. It's noteworthy that it wasn't until my 18th try that I got the scientifically correct response, which is no. The world is starting to react. Schools are now deliberating whether to embrace ChatGPT or view it as plagiarism. Artists are suing as lyrics and visuals created are all by definition derivatives of works by human beings. Lobbyists may find their work much easier, which may not be to the public good. Troubling, humans are also turning to ChatGPT as a kind of Ouija board, asking AI what they should do in their personal circumstances, such as whether to divorce a spouse. There is some larger questions here, though. With the advent of ChatGPT, there has been increasing discussion about whether Western civilization is moving into a post-literate era. We're at 40-year low in the United States in terms of young people reading for pleasure, according to Pew Research. Bosses complain their younger employees boast that they don't read emails, even work emails at all. Universities are dropping requirements for standardized test scores and even personal statements from applicants. Short TikTok videos and 280-character tweets are the limited and limiting daily fare of the rising generation. One high schooler student told the writer that I should be on a TikTok because Andrew Tate is, and because it's neither here nor there if I write books, because his generation doesn't read. It's hard not to see a post-literate Western society as the advent of a new type of dark ages. While historians argue over how dark the Dark Ages actually were, what we know occurred is that the knowledge, learning, and thinking skills accrued during the golden ages of Greece, Rome, and Arabia were largely lost at the rising generations through war and destruction. This time around, these things are being lost to our advances in technology, but the effect is still the same. What is being lost? First, the younger generation does not commit knowledge to memory. Why should they? The internet serves as their memory, but without substantive knowledge banked in your own memory, you cannot think well. For example, I remember when a colleague told me that our master's students in international affairs did not need to know where Afghanistan was on a map because they could just Google it. I would argue that if you do not have a mental idea of where Afghanistan is and what nations surround it, you simply cannot think at a sophisticated level about Afghanistan. Furthermore, and I can testify to this, it's not just that students don't know what nations surround Afghanistan. They don't even know what continent Afghanistan is in. The sheer level of ignorance is stunning. And if you outsource your personal knowledge base to Google or AI, you may or may not receive factual information, as my little experiment demonstrated. The line between fact and opinion, always contested, is now being given up for lost. What's true according to ChatGPT depends on what part of the internet it happened to scrap at a particular time. And that in turn is dependent on what social media companies boost and what they bury. The idea that we would seek a truth that stands independent of our viewpoint is considered quaint, even silly. So much for the Renaissance. Second, illusion is lost. The cultural touchstone that enriched our society are just gone. If I use the phrase, ask not what your country can do for you, many of my students would not know if it was JFK who immortalized that phrase. If I were to say, blessed are the peacemakers, many of my students would not know it was Jesus Christ who said, the Son of God who said this. And don't even think about Shakespearean allusion. Did you know these things? Third, deep reading and critical thinking skills are lost. The most important arguments cannot be distilled into 280 characters. These arguments are not only deep, but they are wide and nuanced and have many dimensions. And it is in that richness that critical thinking becomes possible. As one dives beneath that thin surface of an argument to its complex roots to understand where the weaknesses are, in our time, there is but shallow understanding, for all nuance has been lost. Indeed, even debates on controversial issues where one could hear critical thinkers engage each other's viewpoints are now anathema, because if there is only surface, what could there be to debate? Last, of course, is that all these things combine to create not only extremist ideologies divorced from reality, but these in turn create mobs who are prepared to literally or figuratively rend dissenters limb from limb into the quest for purity of thought. The recent video from McGill University, where a debate between two professors was cancelled because of protesters, is instructive, as this video from Yale, where another debate was nixed by protesters. This is mob rule. Have you seen that? All of this also means that those who continue to read and to practice critical thinking skills will increasingly be unable to effectively communicate with those who do not read. Some have suggested that the only way forward is to emulate those historical oases from the Dark Ages, the monasteries, more particularly an offline hard copy repository of the world's knowledge that can be resurrected by its keepers once the current Dark Ages have passed. Or a more recent example is the Flying University that existed during the Cold War era, which was an underground teaching system to keep alive deep reading and critical thinking skills during Soviet rule. I do my small bit by insisting my students memorize a map of the world and important historical facts, figures, and dates. I'll end with an allusion. See if you recognize it. Do not go gentle into the good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. In your own way and however you can. Keep the light alive during these new dark ages. This is Armen Harayan from TorqueNews.com. God bless you. Have a great day.